Good evening to you, wherever you are, and to those of you who are here in person. My name is Clements. We're at the World Dharma Forum here in Vancouver, Canada. And if I may just take a few minutes to make a few announcements while people come online, and perhaps tell your friends. I'll soon be going to Los Angeles for a few days, where I'll continue the forum. But I'm on my way to Australia in mid-December, where I'll continue there as well. But I have some special events there that are really dear to my heart. I have 3 nights in a row at the Byron Theatre to do an all-new show called Spiritually Incorrect Meets Relationship Incorrect. Thought I'd expand the horizon, the issues, to include the dilemma, the beauty of meeting and loving and feeling and all that comes from intimacy and rejection and struggle and conflict and beauty. And I have a 5-day retreat at my friend Paul and Liz's beautiful Temple Byron, at a non-residential retreat that happens just after the 3 shows. You're more than invited to come. And I hope to see you. It's innovative, it's an experimental retreat, and I can't wait to be there for that. And my friend Peter Downey is doing a documentary film on my shows and my life story. Peter, From My Heart to Yours, I look forward to diving deeply into that. Also, I do my broadcasts, I do my work principally as a gift to myself. I like meeting people. I do it freely. Many people have asked, how do you support yourself? I do it primarily on donations, unsolicited donations, but I'm explaining now. We have a Patreon pledge site up, Patreon/Alan Clements. You could find it there. You could pledge as little as $1 a month to $2 a month to $20 or whatever. It helps. Everything helps. If you want to make a one-time donation to support the work, you can go to my website, alanclements.com, and there under the support page, you can offer whatever you feel inclined to give. From my heart, thank you very much. I have a podcast in the works. We're going to extract the audio from these videos and begin to expand outward. We'll have a YouTube channel, and many exciting new projects are on the horizon for 2019. I'll just save those for the moment, but they're very exciting to me. In addition to a new book coming out, probably within the month, called Wisdom for the World. It's a book of conversations with my late teacher, the Venerable Sayadaw U Pandita of Burma. I read them over the last week, and they're radically inspiring. I was deeply moved and touched by his in-depthness, if you will, to look deeply into the issues of transformation of consciousness and his explanation of mindful intelligence. So with that said, thank you for coming out, all of you. Namaste. And thank you for those of you who are on Facebook Live and tuning in. Tonight's topic is the third part of Advice to a Lover, Advice to Myself. The subtitle, rather provocative, Spiritualized Addiction. The cocaine of the ego, if you could hang with me. This is an extemporaneous talk. All of my talks are unscripted. They're made up as I go along. But I want to dive into this topic, if I can, with you, and try to elevate it into something transformational. And when I use the word addiction, I don't indicate or mean that there's a problem. I know the classical definition, I think, is a behavior or a substance or both that causes harm in the present by the continual use of that particular substance or behavior. And there's obviously a lot of pleasure associated with addictions. Food addictions, conversational addictions, sex addictions, behavioral addictions, money addictions, my goodness, digital addictions. What isn't an addiction? But please, if I can invite you, there's so much cultural, political, social investment in the word addiction and recovery that from my ear and heart, it inherently communicates, if you will, something's gone wrong in your life. There's a problem that you're not aware of, that you're addicted. And there's some degree of blindness and denial, perhaps repressed shame and fear, clearly some kind of traumatic root in it all. Why else would you drink and smoke and do things that were detrimental to you and family and others? An addiction. However, you know, those classic addictions are pretty obvious. Food addictions, from bulimia to binge eating. I mean, all of us know people, all of us have been involved with the complexity of these, I don't want to use the word demons, but at times necessities. Now, let me reverse this back to myself. I have been a smoker, I have been a drinker, I've had compulsions with sex, with masturbation, I've been a meditative addict, I've been a dogma junkie, I've been a religious Buddhist fanatic, I've been an absolutely terrorized, in denial human being addict, I've been a pretender, I've led a double, triple, quadruple life, often unbeknownst to people very intimate and clear to me, all based upon shame and fear and stigma. Pause. You know, having been a former Buddhist monk, being a meditator, being involved in yoga, you know, I live presently in the downtown east side here in Vancouver. It's notoriously 4 blocks of highly complex human complexity. 3,000 people live on the streets. There's at least 50 to 100 people near me, around me, on the sidewalks, shooting up, hitting up any types of drug, whatever they can get. People are lying in the pouring rain, completely opioided out. These are very overt, dramatic expressions of addiction. I mean, I've never seen the carnage of human life laid out so tragically before me as I walk and move from my home on a daily basis. And those of you who know Vancouver, you know that it's an extremely complicated, unbelievably terrifying at times, sirens around the clock, and people ODing on the street. Those are very overt forms of addiction, but more nuanced ones. You know, Michael Stone, I knew him not well. He was a very well-known yoga teacher and a Buddhist teacher, and an eloquent teacher. He was an adept yogi, an adept meditator, had a very large following here in Canada and around the world, prolific writer, married, had 3 children, had a 4th child on the way, and he died of opioid addiction. He kept it completely secret, other than to his own psychiatrist. And when you heard him speak eloquently, he talked about the importance of self-honesty and the authentication of one's own yoga meditative practice. That when you really are true and refined and awake and mindful to the truth of who you are, you're transparent. I mean, you could hear these words from this man. And at the same time, simultaneously, the compartmentalization, for some reason, impacted by fear, denial, shame, a projection of status, of if only if I were to authenticate myself self-honestly and tell my followers and my students and tell the world, I declare myself to be in terror of the use of an opioid. I use it on a frequent daily basis. For some reason, I am not clear why, but I'm lying to you, students. I'm telling a lie to you, students. I'm telling a lie to you, students. Why is that so hard for us to say? the addictions to perfection, the addiction to status, the addiction to enlightenment, the addiction to the now, the addiction to some belief system that you are somehow holier than someone else. And somewhat based upon the cultural equation, the algebra of denial and deception and status and the Botox of my own ego with my own fear and shame and all the various things that come down with my denial of the authentication of my own crevasses, my own fears, my own vulnerabilities. Where did we pick up the habit to pretend? So addiction isn't just a substance abuse or a behavioral abuse. To me, it's a more nuanced sense of the dissonance, if you will, between a self-honest truthfulness of who you are and what you do, and how you conceal those behaviors from yourself and other people, often at the expense of others and yourself. In other words, how do you lie and why do you lie? I think that's a very important question about the nature of addiction. And one of the ways in which I have stopped lying, at least consciously stopped lying, is to beautify my life rather than overcome and be in recovery from things that I deem that I should not do. For example, when I smoked cigarettes for 25 years of my life, rather than overcoming a problem, I chose to beautify smoking. And so what I would do, I was living in Paris at the time, and I would take a chair and I would take the momentum out of the habit, speed out of the habit, but pause. One of the greatest addictions I've seen in monasteries and yoga centers is one cannot call off this habitual momentum into the next. There's something inherent in psyche and psychology and source that just keeps us compelled to this cocaine of behavior that's repeated, and repeated. As a monk in a monastery, there were no clocks. We were told to interrupt the habit of the next. So when I stopped smoking, I didn't have the agenda to overcome a problem, as much as I did to slow down and begin to actualize a co-resonant honor, a dignity, a confrontation, if you will, an activism to confront the shame and the denial and the cultural acquisition of something I was doing wrong. Because I liked it. I liked nicotine. I liked alcohol. I liked sex. And so I said, why not really, really, really open and enjoy it? So I said, okay, don't write and talk and do all kinds of things when you smoke. Find yourself a chair and sit back, tantrify the space, and when you reach for the cigarette, you light the match and you lift it to your mouth and you lower the match and you just have it in your mouth. You know, I never for 20 years ever mindfully smoked a cigarette. Now mind you, I mindfully ate breakfast and lunch in a monastery for the better part of 5 years, slowly lifting a mouthful to my mouth, slowly lowering the fork, chewing, taking the speed out of space. But when it came to cigarettes and drinking and talking and thinking, I just let myself be in the habitual flow of this type of unquestioned repetition of a behavior, repetition of a behavior, repetition of a behavior. How many people I watched in meditation, a spiritualized addiction, I'm going to get it on the next breath. I'm going to get it at the next sitting. I'm going to get it at the next next walking meditation. I'll be more mindful in the next moment, and I'll develop the momentum of this mindfulness until eventually I develop the habit of being mindful, so mindful that I'll be enlightened. Always in this unquestioned momentum that tomorrow, the next moment, somehow is better, more fulfilling than sitting back and taking the neurotic, spiritualized momentum of a forward movement out of your life, taking the form out of it, taking the time out of it, and being very aware, in-breath, out-breath. My teacher often would give students the same instruction over and over and over again. Neither wish to live, nor wish to die. Absolutely. Do not think you need to have an in-breath after the out-breath. If one wants to really be in a challenge to the momentum of any form of addiction, come what may, like jumping around here, like in yoga, how often flow yoga is always in this forward momentum into the next movement, and very few people can ever really move in that wave of the flow without being in the form of the asana. How often we get stuck and imprisoned in the perception of the image and lose all contact with the human being inside that's frail, that's vulnerable, that has to have the perfect poise, but forgets the essence of his or her own heart. And so we beg ourselves, how do I take the neurotic momentum out of my yoga? How do I take the image off the mirror, take the makeup off the face, and begin to sanctify? Who taught you, Alan, to dislike the shape of your teeth? Who taught you, Alan, to somehow dislike the wrinkles in your face? Who taught you to judge the size and the shape of your breast? Who taught you to deny the love and the dignity to embrace your own body as it is in the sanctity of its own humanness? Where is the beauty of self-acceptance in this process that addiction often camouflages? And we find ourselves in repetitive habit in the inability to actually embrace who we are, where we are, right here, right now. Now, coming to the end of this, for years and years I practiced non-attachment. And I did stop smoking cigarettes eventually. One by one, beautifying the process. I still drink. I sanctify that by drinking so slowly. But the whole notion of taking the forward momentum out of something, I used to practice non-attachment as the only paradigm worth practicing. Until I saw this documentary film where this photographer was photographing this monkey. This monkey must have been just an adept yogi. He could do all kinds of arm balances and swinging from ropes and one-handed things. He looked like he was trained by an elite yoga teacher. But he always had his hands on this chair where the photographer was photographing him in these different movements and postures and balances. And then he had the idea of asking the monkey caretaker, do you mind just having the monkey stand on his own 2 feet and let me photograph him as a portrait? And so they took the monkey's chair away. And lo and behold, in this documentary film, this incredibly confident monkey, poised and balanced, happy and delighted, was standing there without any prop and was just nervous. His whole body was just quivering. And I realized, wow, he's touched a vulnerability. And monkeys find their security by holding and releasing and grasping and finding a relationship with things that are innately important to the monkey to feel secure. So it wasn't so much about non-attachment in life, but the ability to mindfully use what we use in an elegant manner and not to be so frightened by things that we think that we are addicted to. Who isn't addicted to something? For example, a much more subtle level. An addiction to comfort, an addiction to size, an image, an addiction to the performance of how you're expected to deal with customers and customer service, and you have a persona. The addiction to a particular way in which you deliver your yoga teaching, and you fail to realize that you're part of a corporate monolith in which you are mouthing words and you forget yourself over time. Where's the authentication of your own being? What about the mindfulness to you in relationship to the voice in the human being that you really, 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 really cannot live without being? I watched these octopus in Hawaii being hunted by Hawaiians. They're very deft at being able to catch these octopus. They'd swim down to the bottom of the lagoon and you'd see them pull the tentacles up of these octopus one by one. And what would they do? They'd put the octopus on the back, and the octopus unknowingly would just cling to the Hawaiian's back and feel secure again. And I really asked myself, as they put 1, 2, 3 octopus, they swam to the shore, they took them off the back, they pounded them and had them for dinner. What's going on in the mindset of someone who feels the security of something that's familiar, but it's to the detriment of their lives? I ask you, I invite you, are you willing to be the Rosa Parks who sits at the front of the bus and confronts the apparatus of white male domination and hierarchy? Where are you in your own life that you are in compliance, that you're in some form of repressed dissonance? You're repressing the beauty of your own spirit to belong to the cult of an unrecognizable totalitarianism that's embedded in the capitalist system of, I need to perform in order for the money to come in. If you're not really careful, we're all addicts of consumption. Today, the greatest secret of all is the quiet genocide called climate catastrophe. Every single one of us are in not recovery today, but are complicit with our behavior, our speech, our denial, our deception. Everything that we do in touch, think, and say is connected to a homicidal economy, as it's been said, that is going locomotive speed towards the precipice of self-annihilation. Is there hope? Look at climate science today. Look at the pundits who evaluate the environment and carbon monoxide and all the various things of methane release in the Arctic and in Greenland. And just check out the future of life precipice at 2 to 10 years from now, and the great collapse economically, environmentally, and planetarily. We're all involved in the addiction of unbridled fetishism of consumption. So whether we drink, or whether we smoke, or whether we think, or whether we're in resentment or judgment, all those forms of addiction are really important. But today, the spiritualized addictions, the ones that are so rampant within yoga studios and meditation centers, I've often said that mindfulness is not to overcome stress, it's to increase an existential anxiety that finds yourself in unthinkable angst, in struggle with the context of your life, because we're participants in a global genocide today, just by the very nature of participating in urban country life, with electricity, with cars, with planes, with food that's being shipped in and flown in from all over the world. We're doing everything today to stay in denial, and often the spiritualized addictions fortify, in my experience, a much more subtle, nuanced sense of feeling better. But the denial is still there, the deception is still there, and I do not recognize my participation in this homicidal economy called global totalitarian capitalism. Yes, indeed, the only spiritual path today that I can see, the only yoga, the only mindfulness, the only intelligence, the only meditation is a disruptive one that says, no, I refuse to participate in this compromised complicity with how my speech, my actions, my behaviors are promoting the death of life. Is there a way to get off the conveyor belt of my participation and my collusion and my enabling of this process? I think it's more a question today that many people who are using forms of addiction, whether it be alcohol or sex or even yoga addiction, always keeping you in deficit in comparison to how you could be if only you practiced more, did more, had another tattoo, did more hours in the studio, did more retreats, addicts for spiritual materialism. And I beg of people, stop. And feel your heart. Listen to that inner truth. What is it that's begging you inside to be an authentic human being that is so willing, so radically available to question the status quo of belonging to the corporate monolith, whether it be the city or the yoga studio or the franchise or the meditation cult or whatever it may be, the guru who's enlightened? Question authority, question totalitarianism, question participation in the blind consumption of stuff, and let us start asking deeply, how am I a participant in genocide, and how am I a participant in nonviolent protection of life and the future of life? Let me close with a couple of things. When I was in Burma, and I've done my fair degrees of study with totalitarian regimes, I was in the former Yugoslavia briefly for the final year of their conflict, a three-way genocide. And totalitarianism is an incredibly overt form of violence in some sectors. In other sectors, in America, North America, Europe, it's incredibly seductive how we're allured into the kind of serotonin effect, the bliss effect of repetitive actions that keep us in denial, where we worship the cult of self. Spiritual grandiosity, spiritual materialism has inverted into the adoration, the enthusiasm, the hysteria of self, the Instagram, a gram of cocaine instantly put into the mouth of one's own inner beingness, and all of a sudden you find yourself worshiping followers, likes. How many times that you find yourself absolutely obsessed with looking at your digital flatline one more time for the 7th hour, 8th hour, 9th hour, 10th hour, counting how many followers versus how many disenfranchise you by unfollowing you. And we're basically addicted to this homicidal economy that's basically saying, I'm not enough based upon the numbers and the analytics that I read into the screen of my own denial. What the hell are we thinking to come out of this absolute hallucination called the worshiping of self? When I was in Burma, back in 1996, I was at Aung San Suu Kyi's house. She had 400 of her most intimate fellow activists invited that day for Independence Day, when her father negotiated freedom from 150 years of British domination, in which the British government created a slave state in Burma. And many of you know that George Orwell, famous for the book 1984, lived in Burma for 3 years, in fact as a policeman. And he lived in an area of Rangoon called Insane District, I-N-S-E-I-N. And in Insane District was the most notorious prison, perhaps in the world, and where all the dissidents in Burma, the most profound nonviolent activists, were sent to insane prison. find that quite interesting. So George Orwell, though, and all the Orwellianisms, from doublespeak to Big Brother, are very embedded in Burmese satire and comedy and theater. Well, towards the end of the day at Aung San Suu Kyi's home in Rangoon, the curtains opened and a man came out with a mustache. And my friend, the translator, told me, oh my goodness, look at this. This is U Parle. He's Burma's most famous spoken word artist. He's the equivalent of, like, I don't know, the Jim Carrey, so to speak, of Burma, or the Robin Williams of Burma. World famous in some circles, and in Burma, ubiquitously famous for her subtle satire towards dictatorship. And it turned out, my translator told me, that this man had been imprisoned for 7 years for his last 90-minute stand-up act in which he mildly satirized the dictator and the totalitarian apparatus of the government. And for those 90 minutes, he was sentenced to 7 years of hard labor with arm irons and leg irons, where he was pounding rocks 20 hours a day. Absolutely unthinkable. Now, mind you, recent studies have shown that I think boys spend 12 hours in front of a flat screen and girls spend 9. There's a type of slavery involved unknowingly in the serotonin dopamine effect of how we're being manipulated by the totalitarian structures of capitalism, and we're losing the individuality of our own choice making, because addiction is the opposite of choice making. It's the repetition of an action that there is no choice, because there's a kind of seduction, attachment to the pleasure effect until it becomes so harmful that we can't even stop it when it's killing us. But in totalitarian governments where they use violence to coerce people, they abolish empathy, the caring for other people. And so a dissident will do all that she or he can to keep compassion and empathy alive. And so Burma's revolution was called the courage to care for things larger than your own self-interest, one person at a time. And one of the best ways to confront addiction to meditation, or to yoga, or to the studio, or to the next retreat, or to the cult of self, or to the next breath, or to the next retreat, to the next asana, is to start opening our mind to otherness, service, feeling, empathy for others, giving back. I watch so many people in the downtown east side kneel down in the pouring rain to these men and women with needles in their arms and wipe their brows from the horror of their torment. They take the needle from their arms, they put a blanket over them, they put an umbrella over them. There is an interface of compassion with horror. But often in the yogic, spiritual, meditative world, there's the belief system that I've got to do more and more, another retreat, a more refined moment of mindfulness, another asana, another trip to Bali, a teacher training, another hierarchy of development in the never-ending hierarchy of spiritual, yogic, meditative, mindfulness development to reduce my stress because I hate my fucking job. Well, to increase the stress would be a very helpful thing, to quit the job. And so U Parle took to the stage, and my friend said for 7 years he was pounding rocks, and he just told everyone there, for 7 years I've been waiting for this moment now. Give me a moment, if you will, to let that in. We've got a radical act of dissidence. Someone's choosing to confront the apparatus of denial, deception, fear, empowering radical courage to authenticate, no, I don't want to keep teaching that set of asanas over and over and over again. I'm tired of teaching 7, 8, 9, 12 classes a week. I am tired of pretending to be the person I am not in order to serve the corporate image of this brand. I am no longer going to be a teacher of this tradition. I am now renouncing my association with the cult even of Buddhism, of mindfulness. I am stopping my obligation to pay my dues to the Church of Vipassana. I refuse to participate in any form of cultism. Can we question our addictions to the next retreat in order to get closer and closer and closer to that perceived sense of personal presence in this moment now? In the language of seduction, the cult of self, always refining myself. In breath, out breath, in breath, out breath, in breath, out breath, in breath, out breath. Perhaps the hardest asana to do is Shavasana, just to neither live or neither die. We're all in this process. If you can breathe in the atmosphere today, it could be the final decade of oxygen on this planet. It could be the final time of growth where there's food. We're in collapse. They all say it. And what will we do with these final minutes, with these final years? How will we behave? How will we think? Who do we want to be? How do we want to live? How do we want to make love? Who do we want to kiss? Who do we want to fall in love with? Who do I want to authenticate inside of myself? And Uparle told that audience, for 7 years I've been waiting for this moment. Now think of that. Be here now, pounding rocks. The whole time, Nelson Mandela said, for 26 years. You can read it in his book, A Long Walk to Freedom. For 26 long years in Robben Island prison, I thought about the day that I would be free. There's no freedom in the moment when there's totalitarianism and incarceration. So much of the spiritual life is to pacify this very hard-earned existential anxiety, this deep cultural anxiety, this deep wrongness to belong in servitude to deities and beings that don't want us to thrive and to flourish. And so we really have to come to terms with what's a radical act. And Uparle told the audience, for 7 years I've been waiting for this moment. And I know that what I'm about to say will land me back in prison. And my translator told me, he said, so be it. Freedom is more important than fear. I invite us all. Where do you feel fear? Michael Stone could have said, I feel fear in the perceived sense of shame that I'm an opiate addict. I'm ashamed that I have a phenol addiction. I'm afraid to admit my inauthenticity. I'm afraid to admit my duplicity. Prem Baba in Hawaii, in Brazil, the famous psychotherapist who now has been seen as sociopathically lying to his students for 15 years, claiming to be a brahmachari and a celibate, and all the while carrying on with an affair with his best friend's wife and his chief female student. Perfectly in the eyes of his students, kissing his feet. The core of my teaching, my students, is self-honesty. Sometimes the biggest frauds are the ones who are selling us the biggest, most transformationally important truths. But they're not walking those talks. They're not following their own teachings. And I beg of teachers, meditation teachers and yoga teachers, to come down off the pedestal of performance, of perfection, and speak from the vulnerability of what it means to be an embodied human being as the hardest asana of all. There is no perfection from meditation. There is no enlightenment that I've seen ultimately down the road. There's only the theology of a dogma of complete eradication of fear, greed, and anger. And Uparle took the microphone and he spoke, he laughed, he satirized, he joked for 60 minutes in the audience of 400 people. They got up and they went, hallelujah. They stood up. They were liberated by his courage to liberate the fear from his voice. He knew he was going back to prison. He had spent 7 years pounding rocks. We're only basically saying, no, I refuse to participate in the cult of yet another namaste tattoo on my ass. I refuse to participate in the contrived tantra of how to do sex. I'm tired of participating in being so fucking mindful that it hurts. I want to come into the authentication of my true being. Whatever that is, I want to become unglued to the perception of an image in a mirror that's not me. What do we have other than our integrity, our conscience, and our courage to care about life larger than our own self-image, and to break down the citadel of this denial, of this cult of self, and authenticate what is truly me versus a narcissistic version of me? You know, I've met some really radical people, prostitutes, girls that dance in strip clubs, soldiers at the front line, genocidal psychopaths who kill for a living, criminals, drug dealers, monks and nuns who've dedicated decades of their lives to in-breath and out-breath. I've seen a lot of different expressions. And U Parlay to me, he had an audience of people touching the core sanctity of their conscience. And they quivered. They knew that they were defying authority. They knew they were defying totalitarianism. They knew they were defying dictatorship. And they knew they were likely going to prison. But they said, freedom is more important than fear. Wherever you find yourself in your life tonight, tomorrow, this next week, the next month, in that next retreat, are you really watching that breath from a place of the sacred awakening of freedom? Or are you watching it to belong to the cult of the ism, the community? Are you doing it despite your authenticity? U Parlay delivered his 90-minute gig, and U Parlay was subsequently arrested. He got 7 more years of hard labor, pounding rocks with leg irons and arm irons. His wife told me that she was allowed to visit him, could not recognize him. I met him before he died back in 2013. I asked him, sir, how did you keep it together in prison? I never let them take my voice from me. My freedom was always more important than fear. Non-conformity to the structures of belonging, to challenge the apparatus of corporate servitude, break lockstep with the asana of how it should be, teach from the heart, not the form, break the imbalance of how you feel to be balanced, and give yourself the chance to authenticate what will be your satire, what will be your spoken word liberation. How will you come out of the coma of conformity to the cult of self and stand naked in the truth of your own beauty, with all your flaws, with all your foibles, with all of those things inside of you that you judge as wrong? And let us resurrect a beauty, not so much of overcoming addictions, but of overcoming the denial of the imperfect beauty of who we are, flawed, open, vulnerable creatures in this humanness that we're all embedded as addicts in this deep consumerism, in this deep totalitarian capitalism, that we all have our foots on the pedal of a genocidal economy. And can we just gradually lift it up and call off the mass murder? Despite the fact there's 8 billion of us on the planet. And may there be a miracle through this collective conscience of a new parlay moment. Speak up your truth. Listen deeply from your heart wherever you have sinned, wherever you have sinned. Alan, seek forgiveness. Saints are sinners who go on trying, as it's been said. Let us break bread where we've made mistakes. Those of you who have hurt and who you have created hurt, may you call out to people. Call out to former lovers. Call them, text them, unblock them, whatever you need to do. But let's break bread together in a new symphony of togetherness We'll only have a few more years before there's an end, perhaps, unless we break through a membrane of dimension into a new universe. You know, Stephen Hawking, before he died, he said the only hope that we have is to re-inhabit the imagination of a new dimension, a new planet. This one seems to be doomed. I don't mean to be throwing hopelessness on the fire, but I pray that authentication of the soul, the unexplainable inarticulation of the pre-intuitive, that there's some miracle in human psyche with the animals, the birds, the truth of inner beingness, that someone speaks out like Uparle, and all of a sudden we have a radical moment of awakening in which the weapons, the patriarchy, the totalitarianism, the capitalism, the whole thing, the whole apparatus just quietly ceases the momentum of our participation in the killing machine. So from my heart to yours, may we have the courage to care about things larger than our own life. May we have a vision of a future of the unborn. May we imagine a world free of this violence, of denial. And may we confront the apparatus of our own spiritual grandiosity and come down off the pedestal of the worshiping of the cult of self and care for other people as family. And let us heal and to forgive. Do all that we can to hold hands again. I love you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that I've ever hurt you, wherever you are. Friends, family, former lovers, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Let us come home and hold hands. Namaste.